Welcome to the Always On podcast. I am your host, Duncan MacPherson, and on this podcast, our objective is to enable our audience, who are high caliber fee-for-service professionals, to always be working on their business and on themselves, personally and professionally. And to that end, today I had a conversation with Paul Blanco. He is the founder and CEO of Barnum Financial Group. And he's also the host of Small Steps, Big Wins, which is a podcast I was on recently. Paul is a thought leader. He's a massive advocate for the financial professional, and he's a serious student of all things efficiency, consistency, and productivity. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. And if you do, please share, tell your colleagues. And if you have any ideas or topics you'd like to hear on this podcast down the road, just let us know. Thanks for listening. So we're all aware of that old saying that says, if you want to get something done, give it to somebody who's already busy.
I agree.
On that same vein, in terms of a paradox, I've been saying for a long time that the people who like personal and professional development the most actually need it the least. It's like a great athlete who's out training all of their peers, all of their competitors. It's such an incredible study. And few people that I've met in this industry personify that mindset and philosophy as my next guest. So Paul Blanco is the CEO of Barnum Financial Group. He's an award-winning financial professional. He's very passionate about financial literacy, which is interesting, Paul, because I just literally this morning read a quote by Mark Twain, and it said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you do know with conviction that just isn't." And there's such a signal-to-noise ratio in all sectors of the economy, but especially financial services. And you are especially good at helping people tune out the noise and focus on what matters. So everybody, read Paul's bio on LinkedIn. He's an essential follow. He's got a great podcast called Small Steps, Big Wins. And he's just a really compelling, interesting guy with an impressive mindset. So Paul, thank you very much for being here.
No, thank you, Duncan. And it was great having you on the show a few weeks ago. And what you and your team have done is amazing in coaching advisors. And you're right in your comment. I am an avid learner. I just love it. I guess I'm a learner on the things I like, right? And
Yeah.
I've learned that about myself. And so financial services and leadership and development is just something I just love. And it's been I'm very fortunate to be in this career almost 35 years and find this business. So I'm excited to share some stuff with everybody today.
Yeah, terrific. And it's interesting, when I was at the conference, when you invited me to speak on behalf of First Trust, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I knew in that room, that environment, a lot of very good-natured people, like just really funny. He talked about hockey. It was very interesting, but also very direct, high octane, ambitious. So you've created a culture. So you've got a really good window. First of all, what I want to ask you, you've got a window on what it is that separates the best from the rest in the financial services space, especially on a retail level. So I'd like to start there.
Okay. I think that I just shared this. I'll share some numbers with you first that are pretty astonishing. We've come up with a growth mindset. Carol DeWick really tied that all together about 7-8 years ago. But prior to that, when I got here, there was only 9 advisors. Today, we have about 365. So it's been an amazing trajectory. But when I got here, I started with that people have to dream bigger. And what's happened is I've watched this with adults. When you're a kid, you're always dreaming really big. When you become an adult, you start to think of the how to. And I had a dad that was pretty entrepreneurial. He was not in any of this industry. He drove a concrete truck, but he always had these great ideas, and then he'd get stuck on the how to and never did them. So I started with this dream big, and then I got the place moving. And then I changed my mantra. And the next step of that was the 4-minute mile. And it was Ken Bannister that did it.
Mm.
And I think the stat is, if I remember correctly, it was 32 people after they said no human could do it. 32 people did it in the next 12 months. So I needed someone here. I'm like 10 years in, 15 years in. I needed someone to break the 4-minute mile, and it was qualifying. At the time, it might have been $1 million of production. Then there was a lot that followed. And then it became growth mindset. And that kind of tied the 4-minute mile and the dream big together. And now, where I tied this into from 2020 to 2024, if you go the advisors, each one of those averages grew by almost 3x in 4 years. And what I did was I showed them, but the point of showing it was to show that if they keep the pace they're going, where would they be in 2028? And then I showed those numbers. And I think that mindset is what Barnum's about. It's about reaching, but then we're not just saying, here's where you'll be in 2028, right? Pretty much on every one of my podcasts, I make a statement about 2020, right? It was the worst thing that happened in COVID. For business, though, it was really one of the best things because it created this environment we're in, this digital environment. But that big bang is not happening again. So many of our advisors were able to grow so rapidly because they were able to see many more clients on a favorable basis, right? Because of Zoom. So now what we're trying to teach is now what's the next thing you have? Now it's inches and feet to continue to grow that. But the culture you saw is this growth mindset.
Yeah, I witnessed that firsthand, and there was an energy there that I really admired. I love the 4-minute mile metaphor because it really reminds us of the psychology of limiting beliefs and the self-fulfilling prophecy and what mindset that you'll see it when you believe it. And sometimes people need somebody else to have a breakthrough for them to break through themselves. It's interesting about financial services because obviously there's this dynamic of aspiration around wealth management and getting to a point where, okay, I want my money to make more money than I do. And I've got to stick to the plan, trust the process, let incrementalism build. But of course, there's a risk management component to that as well. And I think a lot of people plateau because they have this aversion to reaching. They've been knocked down a couple of times. So then the status quo starts to prevail. So the psychology of this is incredible. As a fiduciary, financial advisors are very responsible about managing a client's money. But when it comes to the business, just being able to break out of the status quo and that comfort zone, it's so powerful.
I agree. And I think that people that work with you and your team are fortunate because this is an industry where many people are not getting the coaching, right? So I think to help with that is you just don't wake up and know what to do. Now there is, like you said earlier, there are learners out there that are reaching for anything they can, podcasts, reading books, and trying to implement. And those are truly the 10 percenters, right? But what about the masses? So I think one of the things we have done here, I have this tremendous amount of growth mindset, and we're helping the advisors to think through that process. And the crazy thing about the business is it's not one size fits all. So your coaching has to be very individual, but I always try to teach the team that when you're leading an organization like this, I get the fortune of put me on the bottom of the tree, but I see everyone to the left, to the right, to the top, to the bottom. Most advisors only see people to their left and right, top and bottom. I see the whole tree. So I'm able to take things and apply it to their practices and get them to think differently. And then there's this great phenomenon of stacking, right? You're just stacking one thing on top of the next thing, on top of the next thing. And if you do that very disciplined, in 3 years, you'll just wake up and say, wow, I can't believe I'm here. And I can't believe I'm here. And I think a lot of advisors, though, in this industry have labeled themselves and are finite, where the business is really infinite. And that's the change that we have to get to shift, because they'll say, if I get this much assets under management, or if I have this many clients, I've arrived. And that's when the last 10% is the hardest part, right? And that's where you break through.
It's interesting what you say about stacking. We all know how money compounds, right? The rule of 72. Disciplines compound too, but so too does neglect. Neglect compounds.
Correct.
So we just have to be mindful of that. But I want to come back to this concept of plateau avoidance, because I did at your conference have a very interesting conversation with a team that was sitting toward the front to my left. And I think that team, their business was quite meaningful.
Yes.
I think they were north of 800 million of AUM. And we talked about, I meet teams that manage 250 million and then go through a progression where they have a breakthrough to 500 or more. And I remind them, like, nowhere in your progression did you become a better financial professional. You were always good. But one of the ways that you unlocked your plateau was you got better at practice management and relationship management. You started to understand that those were the unmet needs that required refinement. Now, of course, plateau avoidance also means we have to be mindful in terms of how we invest our time. We all have 24 hours in the day. So I'd like your insight around the whole concept of cause and effect, activity, creating productivity, and some of the insights you give your advisors around how to focus on what they get paid to do.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that team at year end cracked $1 billion. So from whenever that meeting was in September, October to the end of the year, they broke through on, and that's just on recurring revenue, not on their other side of the business and their annuities and other brokerage stuff. But it's really interesting. But that's a great example of, you're right. And I'll dummy it down so easily. And I always go back to this. And if you think of Vince Lombardi, I used this analogy a couple of weeks ago. Vince Lombardi was the great football coach, for the people that don't know, for the Packers. And every year he'd open up the season and say, everybody, this is a football. And then John Wooden, on another example, he was the great coach at UCLA. I think he won 11 in a row championships in the NCAAs. And he would make everyone tie their shoes, all these best 5-star recruits, before the first practice started. They're like, what are we doing here? And he said, that's probably the most important thing, because if your shoe comes untied in the biggest moment, so you got to make sure you know how to do this right. So basic. So I try to take that to the business, and there's really only 2 ways to grow in this business. And people hear me say this over and over again, but you can either see more people, or you can sell bigger cases, or you can do both, right? And until you dummy it down to that, you're just fooling yourself, because someone could have this great growth. And if they were fortunate enough to land a very big client, that might not happen every single year, right? So what we've tried to do is make that really efficient. And that team is an example of that. Even though the CEOs of the team, their best skill set is helping clients make financial decisions, right? But now, how do you build distribution underneath you, understanding your margins and all that good stuff, and get yourself into more of those positions, and then in better ones? And that's how they've grown. Now, that team was a team that started with about 3 FAs, and now there's 11, and they all have different responsibilities. And then there's probably a 35, 40 person staff. But you have to understand your margins, and you have to understand distribution. And if you can continue to show up and do more of those things more frequently, then you're growing. And then it's moving inches and feet and getting efficiencies and stuff. Like, my team must think I'm crazy, but we just implemented about a week and a half ago Zoom phone for the whole firm, and we're using Zoom AI now. And Zoom AI is saving advisors. Many advisors had a customer service person maybe going on calls with them, taking the notes, They could still introduce that person in the first 10 minutes to the client, but save 30 minutes with Zoom AI helping do that. And then that person could send the notes out. So we're trying to find hours and minutes that they could do. Zoom phone is saving for the people that are making tons of phone calls for our advisors. It's saving them 10 seconds a call. It sounds like nothing, but that's an example of what we do here at Barnum and what we do to coach, and we get them to be efficient. Like, it's interesting, Calendly, when that first came out as a tool, many of our teams had one person on their team that managed their calendar. And imagine being on the phone with one client, the other client's emailing you saying, I'll take 2:00 on Thursday. You just offered it to the client on the phone, where now they want to do their reviews for the month. They just send out the link. Clients book right in. It takes 1 minute and there's none of that overlap. So I think it's understanding how distribution works and then understanding all the things you have to do and being as efficient as you can to free yourself up to either see more and bigger or to have some more free time for yourself to go off and golf and spend more time with your family.
That's great. And coming back to Vince Lombardi, I think he said that the best in any field of endeavor are brilliant at the basics.
You got it. He did.
And obviously, we all know, and Chris Jepson loves to say this because it's so true, that complexity is the silent killer of growth. And there are so many initiatives out there that seem so compelling and are so tempting to embrace and deploy, but they come at the expense of some of the more basic tasks that can compound. Like you're saying, that 10 seconds, that minute, just finding little areas of efficiency. A little shameless plug for us, we have an AI white paper coming out for the financial professional. It's very robust. It's about 47 pages, about 17 meaningful use cases and best practices, actually more than that. But it's designed to help people tune out the noise from the thousands of different things that they can embrace and just focus on things that are proven that will compound. But what's interesting about that team you mentioned, Paul, is that this is what's starting to happen now, is you have advisors who are evolving and becoming CEOs. Like, it's no longer a book of business. Now it's an actual business. And I know in your community of financial services teams, you have a lot of people that have really leveled up and become CEOs, and they're running a business like a business. So I'd love to get some insights on that.
And the way we look at it, we probably have 35 formal teams that have a CEO like that and at all different sizes and shapes. And we have a saying, being business in for yourself, but not by yourself. So they're out running these businesses, but they get the benefits of using all the resources, the scalability of Barnum. And what's happening is, culturally, what you witnessed at our meeting this year in Newport was this tremendous community of those team leads and their second and third in command, the better producers, are sharing best practices with each other across the channel. Because what that's doing is helping us to continue to grow. And then we can continue to add more resources and infrastructure for them. So I think that, and they're all at different stages, and we learn different things from all of them. It's interesting. Yesterday, right now, I'm doing a lot of calls with a lot of teams on their goals and their plan for 2025. And I was doing 2 of them yesterday. And these are 2 teams that are at the bottom of the growth in terms, they're growing, but they're smaller teams compared to the top teams. And I learned like 2 best practices that I had not heard from any of our other teams with tools that we've rolled out here. And I went to our head of technology and I said, by the way, like, this practice is one we have to make a best practice and start. So that our head of technology is already meeting with that team today. This just happened this time yesterday. And we're putting that together, and we'll share that with all the teams now. So I think the growth part is creating that mindset. When you look at the world of independence in our business, and you can go through all the different distribution models that are out there.
Yeah.
The cool thing that I try to teach here is this is an individual sport, but we get the benefits of all seeing what everyone grows. So we try to share and grow and teach those different things and try to help them to scale at a level. And I would say that 25 is the biggest word for us, is scale. And I'll use an example of something we did probably 3 years ago. We created a role internally. We have a saying here that I created in the late 90s that ties right into the see more, sell bigger. And as I was thinking about starting with 9 people, I was not able to create a value prop that some of the firms in my market had, where they had advanced market lawyers and CPAs on staff and to different departments. I had vision. So when I looked at that, I said, what can differentiate me and Barnum from everyone in the marketplace? And I created a saying, wrote a lot of articles about it back late 90s, early 2000s. The saying was, we're going to be a marketing firm that does financial planning. And if you unbundle that, it's real simple. If I could get smart, articulate advisors in front of clients, that's the hardest part of the business. And then if you think of planning, I remember growing up and they would say, we got to sell more affluent people. And I'm like, where do I find them? Help me. Like, they don't just fall from the trees. So I realized that financial planning, if you sold 5, 6, 7, 8 products in a household, you can drive your case size up so much more effectively than trying to just wait around till you found. So we did that. And today, I want to say that last year we generated like 1.5 million opportunities for our advisors. So we're delivering those, but with that delivery, we had to help them scale. So we created a role called the Business Development Associate. One of our teams piloted it, and they brought 3 people on that these people work directly for the teams. And their job is to call some of these opportunities we have. And then if you think about any business, wealth management business in there's probably a senior, a middle, and a junior. And this person's taking assets of this much, this one's taking, and this BDA was learning the business, doing that in a 2-year program, getting paid a salary and a bonus. And then after 2 years, they got to get all their licenses and complete their CFP. And then they flip to a financial advisor 2 years later on the team. So we've had probably almost 50 of them. We've probably had 10 that finished the 2 years, and the others are in that development stage. But we started one team, multiple teams are hiring that type of associate now. That's just an example of us scaling, but coming up with an idea, packaging it up, and then teaching the FAs. And then we go out and help find. The one thing the firm does is we partner because we find them and then they develop them. So it's a great partnership.
And I love, and again, this is what I've noticed over the years, is the best communities, they crowdsource best practices. They foster an environment of very friendly co-opetition.
You got it.
And
I love that word. I'm steal that one.
Yeah, I think I stole it from somebody way back when, but different context. The whole notion that the pie is big, all ships can rise. We don't have to think in terms of scarcity.
Correct.
There's so much abundance. And again, I think that's only going to get better as we work through some things in the world here. But I will say this, it's interesting because when we do strategic planning with a team, and I get into the weeds with the lead who has become the CEO, like this just literally happened yesterday, where in the last 5 years, he moved from advisor to CEO. He went down to personally managing 50 clients, brought on some proteges, built out his team, built out his process, embraced the notion of culture, HR, best practices. His enterprise value has gone through the roof. His growth personally and professionally gone through the roof. And there's no qualitative plateau there, because the conversation we had yesterday is the next 5 years, he wants to move from CEO to basically chairman to ambassador. He wants to work 20 hours a week. There was a time where he was thinking about getting out of the business.
Sure.
Now he's at a point where I want to go live my life. I want to go write the great American novel. I want to travel. I want to pursue some hobbies that I put parked on a shelf for a while, but I still love what I do. And so that's another way to level up.
That is the way. That's like I said earlier, that person went from the FA to the CEO, but now they're building a distribution channel versus running a financial service practice. And that's creating so much value throughout the board. And by the way, it's creating so much value for the clients too.
No question. That's the thing about enlightened self-interest as a fee-for-service professional. The best way to take impeccable care of your clients and your team is to take impeccable care of yourself. That is enlightened self-interest.
If this podcast resonates with you, then you're likely the kind of advisor who strives to be indispensable to high net worth families. In partnership with Pareto Systems and the Institute for Preparing Heirs, we're offering exclusive live training to become the most trusted advisor for high net worth families. The Great Wealth Transfer Program equips you with the training and tools to secure and enhance multi-generational relationships. It's about becoming not just an advisor, but the most trusted advisor. Join us for the live training. Visit paretosystems.com/IPH to learn more and register today. Info can also be found in the description of this podcast. Again, that's paretosystems.com/IPH. Position yourself as the trusted advisor for generations to come.
Have you ever felt like you're alone on a desert island? You know, alone, with your challenges, and wishing you had a group of successful advisors to share ideas with, solve problems together, and push each other to reach bigger outcomes. Well, you don't have to be alone. Hi, I'm Scott Hamilton, a Pareto coach, and I also lead the mastermind groups for Pareto Systems. Our goal? To help advisors achieve bigger, better futures faster than they could on their own. Through our mastermind format, what we call collective genius, we bring together successful advisors to share best practices, insights, and solve problems together. Some of our groups also are focused on specific niches, like divorce or M&A. All groups are led by Pareto coaches who've worked with hundreds of top-tier financial advisors. Ready for more? Visit ParetoMastermind.com for details and to check out our upcoming webinars. That's ParetoMastermind.com. Bigger, better, faster.
Okay, so which brings, you talk about how this industry and growth is so individual. There are some advisors that want to see how big they can get. Let's keep going. And that comes in a variety of forms. Pure, maximized organic growth. Some decide they want to pivot to scaling up. B2C, B2B, proof of concept. Let's build this out that way. But then on the other side, you've got some advisors who their form of growth, to grow up market, to deal with more complex clients, is to grow down. Like their view is, it's not to see how big I can get, it's how small I can stay. I just want to level up the caliber and the sophistication of the client that I'm working with. So you got on one side, you've got, let's take this and see how far we can take it. On the other side, you've got, let's keep it lean, let's keep it small. Any insights or thoughts on that?
No, I think that's great. It's back to what I said earlier. It's an individual sport, right? And the way we look at it, we'll support them all and we'll support them differently. But some of the things you can bring to the table and some of the things in either one of those practices is very scalable. And that's the key. And it goes back to my questions would be through all those models is how do you add the clients? How do you retain the clients? And where's the next one coming from? If they can answer all those questions, every one of those models is amazing. I love that. One of the things I do hear frequently, though, I don't want to build and I'm talking about, they have this revenue number. This producer's doing 5 million of revenue, and this person's doing 1 million, and says, I don't want to build my practice the way that person did. And I'm like, that's great, but I want to do that number. Okay, then we have to find what you're going to do that is scalable, that attracts the right clients, retains the right clients. And those are the questions that then they'll say, I'm not really sure. Then you have to get a combination of both. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. And then I think people they think it through, and then they just stop and they just stay. And by the way, if you stay in this business, it's usually that you're going backwards.
What's interesting about that, part of my process when I work with a team early, and I'm getting into it with the lead about big picture, what does Nirvana look like for you down the road? Just paint me a picture. And I'm instantly reminded of this mindset that says, you've got to really fully appreciate what you've got as you aspire to what you want. And I say that because 9 out of 10 financial advisors that I talk to, when I ask them, I say, do you ever stop and pinch yourself regarding your good fortune in business and in life? Did you ever think 20 years ago that this is where you'd be? 9 out of 10 say, I have far surpassed my wildest dreams. Now, that can be limiting. I've exceeded. Why keep going? Self-actualization is very personal, but it's neat to bring that out, to have somebody say, okay, why stop? Am I going to regret 10 or 20 years from now reaching a little bit further? Am I going to regret getting into a bit of a mode of complacency or status quo? Just focusing on what is possible. Paul, I'm curious about your views on the future of advice, because it would appear that the commoditization is accelerating. I remember we were talking about robo, and back when we shifted from transactional to directional, fee for service and advisory. But now, of course, you get all this noise regarding AI aced the CFP, right? What is your view on how technology and commoditization, then you throw in some turbulence and volatility, how is that, in your view, going to impact the business of the fee for service professional?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I get that frequently. And when you were saying your other points, I was going to say this, you have to always look at the past. You always have to look at the present, and then you have to look at the future, right? That's how you grow.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting if you think about that. So I started out purely on the life insurance side. And during that time, when I first started, my first year in the business, I remember a stat that direct mail in the life insurance space had made up 5% of the sales in the business. Then you fast forward, you get into the AUM game and the robos come out. And at the high, it was about 5% of the business. And direct mail's gone. It was replaced by the robo and the select quotes on the insurance side, but the robo on the investment side. And you fast forward. So my opinion is the business is getting way more complicated. People's lives are more complicated. And I think AI will take up 5% of the business. But I think advice and advisors, and there's a stat that drives me crazy, though. There's 300,000 FAs in the industry, and that number's been the same for a pretty long time. It's starting to shrink a little bit. 40% of them are over 55, and only 9% of them are under the age of 30. So it's truly the advisor's opportunity to lose. And if done properly, like we were talking about all these teams and the way they're building this potential to unlock, it's the greatest opportunity ever to be in this business right now. So I think where AI is going to make a difference is giving those advisors and those teams and these distribution channels the ability to be more efficient and more effective for the client, right? And if you're not jumping on I was going to tell you earlier, please send me your white paper. If you're not jumping on that and you're not having someone in your division or a consultant you're working with that's specializing in that to help your team, you're going to lose out on tons of efficiencies that you could have to help you grow faster. But I don't think it'll ever replace the business that we're doing.
That's just it. Okay, so the soundbite is that I don't know how many advisors AI will replace, but it will certainly replace a lot of advisors who don't embrace AI.
100%.
And this is, again, talked about this recently with an advisor. It will either serve you or hurt you. Okay, because the one thing artificial intelligence will never have is emotional intelligence.
I
So
agree.
you talk about the complexity of needs accelerating. Then, of course, the whole emotional dynamic around preparing heirs, continuity and succession, family investment legacy, and all the pieces of that puzzle. If an advisor does embrace technology fully and completely, it actually liberates them to identify the unmet needs that exist in their business, identify the unmet needs and the evolving needs of a client, and apply that bedside manner, that emotional intelligence, which I think so many people are going to crave as technology creeps into our lives more.
Think about what I said earlier, just a simple example, Zoom AI, getting it on the call. It's just like your phone. Advisors don't realize that because it gets better as you use it more. And then people are taking that and put it in ChatGPT to summarize for them to get that document and that summary out to the client. So much more effective than taking in notes and the old days with your assistant, or taking the notes and dictating it. The time and the energy that's being spent and the efficiencies they're creating can't be replaced. I think the bigger danger is that I've seen is so many people now when you use the word financial services, like we're talking wealth management, but you could say financial services. I think the bigger danger is all the other product lines, for example.
Right.
Meaning there was a lot of roll-ups 4 or 5 years ago in the Medicare space where there was firms that went out and bought 200 Medicare companies throughout the country and now is servicing that, and then realize those margins keep getting shrunk. So now I'm going to go out and sell annuities, or let's go buy a wealth management firm. And now if you're an FA and you had your client for all these years and you didn't have a relationship with someone on the Medicare space, maybe your client goes to do that with someone very innocently because you don't do it. And then they're trying to go after your AUM or your protection. So I think having those things around you to make sure you're putting a wall around your clients, because the quickest way to lose the value that you're building is to lose the client, right?
Okay, so I go back to that conference in Newport.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember, but when I got into that, when I talked about the commoditization of wealth management, and I said to your crew, I said, you're actually technically not a wealth manager. Wealth management is part of your process.
Right.
Risk management, tax efficiency, estate, continuity, succession, debt, and all those other instruments, charitable giving and benevolence, and then all the value-added services. That the conversations I've had with some of your people around that 7 pillars, 1 process, like not getting a client to buy individual things from you, but getting them to buy into the process and how it's fluid and dynamic and puts all the pieces together as someone's life unfolds. That is a massive breakthrough for advisors on their positioning to help get clients to focus on what they're worth, not what they cost, and buying into that process. So yeah, that your team is very enlightened about that. Okay, I want to ask you another question. So I talk endlessly about working on the business, not in the business, not trading time for money, not transacting, but actually building something. I know this is near and dear to your heart. tell me some of the perils of not working on the business. Like, what is the consequence of staying on the path of transacting?
Oh, I'll use a real life example here at Barnum that can really affect someone. So I was very big when I first came into the industry, and I came in 1991, and CRMs were really not a pretty big thing at the time.
Right.
And so once I took over in leadership, we started to build a CRM. We built a whole platform. We're from Excel, then SQL, and now it stands on one of the top companies out there platforms. And we've built some proprietary tools, and we call it B2. And in B2 is, I want you to think about this, Duncan. Think about scaling your business think about, there's three things that really happen with a client. There's product changes, and think of all the products we sell and how many changes could be on them. Like in the annuity space, think about how quickly they change for clients. The protection space, and think of all the age-based opportunities, and then think of all the social opportunities that are going on. So we've built a tool that has all of that. So we call them tiles. So right now there's maybe 75 tiles. So think of an advisor that has a book of business, and every day these algorithms are running, and it's telling them when to call a client and why. Besides your regular formal reviews that you might have set up, there's times in that we have advisors that don't even know how to use the tool. So when you think of working in versus on, they're just, and I always say the teacher arrives when the student's ready. So our job is to continue to help them. But if you're out by yourself and they don't have someone like you and your team helping them, how do they do that? So I think it's so critical for advisors to do that. And then it was really interesting. Like I said, I've been in the business a pretty long time. I've had the same financial advisor for about 20 years now, personally. And I was at a conference, and this is when Tiger Woods was at his heyday, and he had 3 coaches. And I'm like, holy mackerel, here I am, because I'm in the business trying to manage my own asset management. And now obviously it wasn't as complex then as it is today, but I immediately hired an advisor and did that on many other fronts. So many advisors just have to step back and say, back to what we said earlier, where do I want to be? How do I want to grow? And then what are the steps I have to take? And then find someone to work with them to do that. And they have to do that. And they have to put special time to do that. That's the funnest part for me, because I do both all the time, right? I'm always tinkering with the stuff that's going on that we're building to develop that value prop, but I'm also doing the top. And here's the thing that I've done for 31 years that I've been fortunate enough to lead this organization, to do working on versus working in. I drive to work in the morning and I say, I'm talking to myself in the third person here, like Paul Blanco has hired me to look at Barnum today to see what I could do to make Barnum better. And then when I go home, I say, is he going to hire me back today? What did I do today to make, and that's the working on versus working in. And that's how I do it. And it works really well for me.
It's very solid, very enlightened. I'll play on the Confucius when the student is ready. And this is my version based on the demographic shifts that are occurring in the world, but also in this space, is that when the teacher is ready, the protege appears.
Yes.
And one of the byproducts of working on your business, if you want to create continuity and succession, is just make those investments now well in advance. And then the other version of that, of course, is when the buyer is ready, the seller appears. When you build out your business, when you put as much emphasis on practice management and relationship management as you do on asset management, you create professional contrast, your ability to differentiate yourself. Because let's just say, Paul, I'm coming towards the sunset in my career as a financial advisor. I don't have a protege. I want my clients in good hands. I want to empower somebody with my business. Yes, I want to have my liquidity event. But if I know that everybody else I'm talking to, all they've got is the money to buy my business, but you've got the ability to actually transition my clients, elevate their client experience. I know they're in good hands. You're just going to be so much more attractive. And there's
I
more
agree.
buyers than sellers, but that's just an opportunity to differentiate and stand out. And that's, again, one of the beautiful ripple effects of working on the business. Not to mention, of course, enterprise value. So anyway,
Well,
closing comments on that?
No, and I think what's really awesome is when I told that business development associate story earlier, you just tied that together with the teacher and the protege, right? It's the same concept, but you're working on your language to explain it to the masses. It's very proprietary here at Barnum, how we talk to that language. But the way you just said that is exactly what we're doing. So we're trying to get the teacher ready to see that they have that opportunity right in front of them. But you're doing it at such a scaled level. It's amazing to hear the language.
And I can tell you've created a community of serious students. We've got that virtual group coaching that we're launching soon. Huge surge of interest from your crew. And then, of course, the one-to-one. And it's early days, but what I love about what we do is we get as much out of these relationships as our clients do. They bring so much to the table and so generous, sharing, and no ego, but confident, right? They're very confident people. But no, it's just an absolute pleasure. Okay, let's wrap up. Call to action. First of all, Paul Blanco is an essential follow on LinkedIn. So go find him there, number one. And number two, your podcast, Paul, Small Steps, Big Wins. Where can somebody find that? Probably on LinkedIn, but beyond?
Yeah, Apple, Spotify, it's on the major ones and it comes out weekly. It's always an advisor or a coach or someone in the industry that's doing it. It's really geared for this industry and entrepreneurs. And if you think about it, when we created that name, it's exactly the stacking concept. It's take small steps and keep stacking them, and then you get big wins. And if you look at how Barnum and our advisors' practices have landed where they are, that's what I've lived for the last 30 plus years.
I love the inflection point, and I love having conversations with people who are that proverbial 25, 30-year overnight success story. It built slowly, gradually, and then it just caught. The traction grabbed, and then to the moon. And people just, I love this concept. When you buy into causality, cause and effect, and you detach yourself, no attachment to an outcome. You just immerse yourself in really good quality activity and just be at peace with how it plays out. Good things generally happen.
They do. And it's funny you say that. I remember doing a presentation a few years ago at a conference, and someone came in and said, that was an amazing presentation. How long did it take you? They meant to build the presentation. And I said, just 30 years. But once again, if you have that I said it earlier, the Simon Sinek book, right? Infinite Games.
Yeah.
That's my life. I just keep every day, and I do it personally and professionally. And I think that's the key to having fun and having the choice that you want for your life. Surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you is a big one that we've done here. And we just continue to just try to win each day.
Yeah, I love that. Not to one up you on the 30 years, but I remember reading this thing about Picasso. Somebody recognized him on the street in Paris and said, I want to pay you to sketch my portrait. So he did it right there. And it took him 5 minutes. And he said, okay, that'll be 1,000 francs or whatever it was. And the lady said, 1,000 francs? You did this in 5 minutes. He said, no, it took me all my life to do this. Very good concept around what goes into your value to get you to this point, around the inflection point of reputational equity and thought leadership. So listen, really great. On our conversation, I loved how unscripted that was on Small Steps, Big Wins. It was just very organic, and I really appreciate that conversation, and I appreciate this one too. Thanks very much.
Same here, Duncan. Thank you. And thank you for all you're doing. If you look at our purpose here at Barnum, it's to impact as many lives as possible, right? And when I stepped out of personal production, very early career, it was very scary for me to not be working with the end user. And then I realized that I'm going to have a ton of people that go out and do that for me. So what you're doing in your team for FAs in the community, you're impacting because they're going out and doing that. So that's a real amazing thing that you're doing. And there's so many lives that are better because of what you and your team do. So please keep up the great work because we need more of that in this industry.
I appreciate that a lot. That's high praise coming from you. It's funny you say that. I just literally had a conversation the other day with an advisor that immersed himself into thought leadership. But from a standpoint of narrowcasting, he was very specific about who he was talking to. And he wasn't getting a lot of traction. But I said to him, this is not about popularity. It's about impact. Stick to the plan. And he said to me, the fish are jumping in the boat. I'm not getting viral in my distribution, but the quality of introductions I'm getting is astonishing. And that's your point. It's not about popularity. It's about impact. And then just be at peace with how that plays out. So great points.
Thank you and have a great day. And thanks again for doing all you do.
Yeah, we'll cross paths soon, I'm sure.
You got it.
Okay. Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
You got it, Duncan. See ya.
Right on.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Always On with Duncan MacPherson, where our objective is to enable professionals to always be working on their business and on themselves. Want to learn more about Duncan and his team? Visit ParetoSystems.com. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Pareto Systems. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.